All right, welcome back, everybody, to this special edition of I Mix What I Like. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Uh, as Please like, share, subscribe, do all those things. As I like when these things happen. Someone put me in contact with um, a graduate student struggling up there at MIT, whose work and the work of a magazine they're associated with has been banned or suspended from the campus. And I was very happy to catch up and to uh, read a little bit about it, and then to be able to get in touch with the graduate student themselves and invite them here. So let's just get into it and talk about what's going on here as we continue to cover in a variety of ways various forms of repression, including those occurring that which occurs on campus. So, Pralad, am I saying your name correctly? Welcome.
That's right. Thank you, Jared.
Could you, first of all, please introduce yourself and say as much as you would or would like to about who you are, how you came to this issue, what is exactly going on, and then I have a number of specific questions because I got a chance to read about what's happening to you. I got to read your the article you wrote in the magazine and question. All of that's going to be linked in the show description. But please, if you would just say a little bit about who you are and how we got to where we are. Again, welcome.
Sure, absolutely. So my name's Pralad Iyengar. I'm a second-year PhD student at MIT. I study electrical engineering and in the area of quantum information. I got involved with the Coalition for Palestine last year. I was a first year at the time. It was my first year at MIT, and I got involved with some groups who were protesting for Palestine and trying to get trying to increase awareness and trying to increase you know support for the cause on campus, and then also link up with groups in Boston and Cambridge. And I was actually one of the founders of Written Revolution. Myself and a few others decided that the administration had been turning their narrative around. And using their dominance over communication channels. I mean, the upper administration has the ability to email literally everybody at the institute, anybody who's affiliated with the institute. So we began Written Revolution in February of 2024, so this year, and it was basically an attempt to kind of seize the narrative back and say, look, these are our stories, right? This is what we have seen, what we have done, and this is what we've experienced at the hands of the administration, at the hands of the police. And it's not just centered around Palestine, although Palestine is, of course, a very central issue. We're kind of a zine that's our goal is basically global liberation. You have the website up here, exactly, and we wanted to empower people who have been fighting for global liberation, to be able to tell the stories, to be able to describe what's been going on campus, produce art. Like you can see our cover arts. Our cover art is really often made by students, and we want to tell our stories. So that was the idea behind Written Revolution, and I'm one of the chief editors. There are four of us who are editors of the zine, and we've now put out 5 editions, and my piece on pacifism appeared in the 5th edition. So this edition that you're scrolling through right now.
Yeah, I'm just trying to show a little bit so people can get an idea of how it looks. It's beautifully put together, and from what I've read, the content matches the style. So it's yours included, very well written, well laid out, and provocative. Importantly, provocative. So I would encourage people, if they haven't, to check the link in the show description and do as I'm going to continue to engage it and see what more is in there, because I admittedly sort of, for the most part, I think I looked at 1 or 2 pieces, but I skipped primarily to yours to try to be a little bit prepared. This piece here on pacifism, and so I mean, I don't know how. Yeah, so I admit I'm a little bit excited to rush to the content of that of what you've written, but just before we do that, the reaction from the university, just let's skip to where we are today. Like where, and then we can come back and fill in the gaps. Where are things right now vis-a-vis you, the magazine, and others you're working with and MIT?
Sure. So I've been banned from campus. I'm still technically registered as a student, but I'm not allowed to set foot on campus. Not allowed to attend my classes. Not allowed to do my research in person. Of course, as a graduate worker, I also work at MIT. So that's where I do my research, where I do my that's my occupation. That's where I get paid. So it's been a little bit of a difficult transition to try to move to remote work. Also to move to remote work on all my classes, remote learning. But the other thing is
But
that
you can, I'm sorry to cut you off, but you can continue to take classes remotely, and you can continue to do work and at least keep your income.
So at
Is
the moment,
yeah.
this is true, but that's because this is an interim sanction. This ban is an interim
Mhm.
sanction before any due process. But I got word earlier this week that they are attempting to take me to. They have decided to take me to a committee on discipline panel, and at these hearings, the expected, I guess, discipline is either suspension or expulsion, right? The only reason they take you to a hearing is because they want to put suspension or expulsion on the table. I have
And
been in a hearing before. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but the charge is what though? I'm not.
So the charge is it's a variety of charges. Specifically for the article, it's I believe harassment and threats. That's I think the major content, and then some kind of violation of student integrity, which of course
Mm,
they get to decide whatever
mhm.
integrity means to them in the moment. But yeah, I think the majority of the charges related to the article are related to threats and intimidation and harassment.
But no, beyond that, there's no elaboration on who's being threatened, targeted, and in what way you're doing that.
There have been
Uh,
anonymous reports submitted. I've been able to see those reports. The reports are full of really terrible rhetoric. I mean, for example, one of the reports refers to me as a student terrorist,
mhm.
and this is the sort of rhetoric that they're sort of empowering by allowing that kind of submission to go immediately to a disciplinary hearing. The other thing that
Okay.
I'll just mention is that they've also skipped a lot of the very important procedural aspects of these disciplinary cases in order to streamline my process straight to a disciplinary hearing, right? Which is very unusual. For example, these reports that I received, which are anonymous, the first time I ever saw them was when they were already uploaded to my evidence file against me in a discipline case. The usual procedure is that when a report is made against somebody, they're supposed to be able to get to answer to those charges, and they're supposed to be able to answer to the IDHR department, which is the Institute Discrimination and Harassment Resource Office. And I never got a meeting with them. I never got a chance to answer to those charges. I never got a chance to talk with them. They're supposed to do that before going to any disciplinary measures. Instead, the report was filed. One of the reports against me was actually filed on Friday, November 1st at 5:40 p.m., around 5:40 p.m. And it was uploaded to my evidence file 3 hours later at 8:40 p.m. the same day. So that tells me that either there was some collusion to get the student to report so that it could be used for my evidence, or they're just streamlining the process generally and they're skipping over very crucial steps that I'm actually entitled to have under federal law. And the fact that they've skipped over these steps tells me, one, they're not holding back, they're ready to bare their teeth and issue discipline, and two, they're careless and they're acting in a way that I think is extremely damaging to our university, extremely damaging to free expression and academic freedom on the campus. But it sort of reveals that there is no such thing as academic freedom or free expression up to the point where you say something that the university disagrees with.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm trying to be responsible and professional here and
Sure.
make sure we get the nuts and bolts taken care of, because again, I think what you've written and is is exciting. Um okay, what about the zine itself? There was discussion of it being banned as well. To what extent, what does that mean when so much of it is digital as well? How is that being policed? And are there others beyond yourself that are also similarly suspended, or is this just you and just the zine?
So in terms of the ban from campus and the discipline that that is being dished out based on this zine, I am the only one who's received actual discipline so far, or any interim action. But the four editors, including myself, of Written Revolution, we received an email on November 1st, basically outlining, that this edition was going to be banned from campus. What that means is effectively they are banning the distribution of the edition on MIT's campus, and also banning it off campus under the name of any MIT recognized organization. Our zine is an MIT recognized organization. It is as of the fall semester, this semester, we became an official MIT organization because we wanted to have, funding to do stuff like events and launch events for our zine and things like this. So, they're effectively banning us from distributing this zine under our own name, right? I mean, of course, the name Written Revolution appears on the title, on the cover page. And so there's no way for us to distribute our product, our zine, without, without violating their rules. And so, of course, the zine is online. It's on our website, which is not an MIT website. It's our own website, and it can be accessed. And actually, we've gotten an increased demand, obviously, since the ban. So, to me, it was a very ineffective thing for them to do. It was actually, in some sense, counter-effective. At the same time, there have been kind of worrying incidents on the campus. Just the week after the ban was put into place, two students were reading the zine, not distributing or not doing anything like that. They were reading the zine in one of the buildings at MIT, and the police were called. So somebody felt first empowered to call the police because students were reading. And the police came and questioned them about, okay, where did you get this material? Are you distributing this material? We received a call that you're distributing banned materials on the campus, etc. So the police, the MIT police, are also involved in this in a large extent. So I think it shows that there's a significant danger to taking these steps, right? I mean, now we're at the point where MIT feels like they can send police to harass students for reading material that they disapprove of.
All right. So speaking of that material, because immediately you. So I'm wondering. So you immediately evoke the name Ward Churchill. You build from his work, and you. Are you even aware, by the way, of his own career and the plagiarism scandal that the universities threw on him, and the whole trial and the whole, because the first thing I thought was, and to what extent, my question was, to what extent would that have been intentional, given it's, well, not in, well, it couldn't have been intentional given you wrote it before all this happened, but it's so not intentional, but, and not ironic either, paradoxical, in you evoking this name of someone who challenged the settler colonial status of the United States and its university system, who was then falsely accused of plagiarism and attempted to have his career destroyed and name ruined as a result. And at the time I read a lot about that case. It was fascinating. Derek Bell and others came to his defense. It was in many ways a beautiful moment, similar to what you're doing here, exposing the realities of these structures. Then, of course, he comes back again after 9/11 with the little Eichmann's comment, not inaccurate, but similarly provocative, goes through a whole other whirlwind. And then here you are bringing in his name and his argument, which I would love for you to lay out, which is a critique of the left, of activists, and our obeisance to nonviolence. So, yeah, please tell us about the essay. Again, I've linked it in the show description. It's a powerfully and well written piece. I encourage people to check it out. But yeah, tell us a little bit about how
Absolutely.
you got there.
Sure. So, I mean, so Pacifism as Pathology was recommended to me by a close comrade of mine, and I respect them a lot, and so I figured, okay, I'll read this, and it's something that I think is worth reading. When I read it, I I mean, there's so few books I think in my life that I've read and immediately felt like a visceral feeling in response to it. And I think Pacifism as Pathology is one of those books. The reason is because when I read it, I immediately could recognize what he was talking about. I could immediately recognize the types of actions that he was talking about as pacifist actions that lead nowhere. And one thing that I really appreciated about the book is not that it's not some kind of scathing critique of people's, I guess, moral tendencies and that kind of thing. It's really a very tactical and strategic piece, right? It's talking about tactics and strategy and saying if you truly believe in these things, then you ought to act in a certain way. And I there was a passage in there where he talks about the types of actions that people take, these rallies that are basically self-policed with marshals around, and these types of actions where people just sit and listen to a preset list of speakers. And during that section, I internally I was thinking, wait, I have done this, right? Not only have I been at these events, I've also helped put these events on, right? So I read it and I was reflecting quite a bit about the carceral system here, our avoidance of the carceral system here, our inability to handle violence when it's invited upon us, right? And after reflecting on it, I thought, okay, how does that have bearing on the modern Palestine movement, right? Because of course the Palestine movement has existed for decades, but certainly I think it's maybe never gotten this much visibility, right? It's unfortunate that it's taken an accelerated phase of genocide in order for that to happen, but it is really important for us to reflect on where we are as a movement. And to the point of pacifism as pathology, we have to also reflect on whether we've achieved our goals. And sitting here in the imperial core, we haven't, right? Just earlier this week, Biden had promised to cut or to instantiate an arms embargo on the Zionist settler colonial state if they continued with their humanitarian atrocities, right? Especially if they continue to limit aid, if they continue to attack humanitarian workers. And all of those conditions, none of those conditions were met, right? Some of those conditions were supposedly partially met, but even then they weren't really met. And a lot of steps have actually been taken to go in the other direction. And yet still we are here not only funding a genocide, but arming a genocide, right? So to me, there's no other way to look at it but a failure, right? We have not yet achieved our goals. And so the question to me was, okay, why? Why have we not yet achieved our goals? What still remains to be done? I think that in large part, the point of talking about pacifism is to really get at this ideology that comes behind it, right? And for me, the ideology of pacifism that Ward Churchill, I think, puts phenomenally, right? I mean, my essay is a reflection, but I think Ward Churchill's essay is much more in depth and much more, I think, hard cutting when it comes to critique of pacifism. But his major point is, look, if you truly adopt pacifism as a strategy, right, as an ideology, as a fixture in your movement, then you are giving or ceding the monopoly of violence over to the state, right? And this is, and I think we have to speak kind of broadly about what is meant by violence, what is meant by pacifism. It also literally means physical violence, right? We allow ourselves to be policed. We allow ourselves to face the atrocities of police brutality. We allow ourselves to face that, but yet not stop the atrocities that are happening in Gaza, which are the things that we're supposed to be, fighting for. We're supposed to be fighting against these atrocities, right? And so I think that was the sort of basis, was to say, okay, I think we're not doing something correctly, right? We're doing something incorrectly, and we have to figure out ways to really subvert the state, right? And I think the part that has sort of been overshadowed, at least in my piece, right? And this isn't necessarily something that I think features prominently in Churchill's essay, but the part of the subversion of the state, the subversion of the institution, that I think is maybe most promising, is actually setting up mutual aid. I consider mutual aid networks to be a strongly non-pacifist version of protest, version of subversion of the state. The reason for that is because ultimately mutual aid is effectively removing that power from the state, right? If pacifism is saying, okay, I will cede the monopoly of violence, the monopoly of control over my loved ones to the state, then I believe that mutual aid is a way for us to take that back, right? There's also other forms of protest that I think we need to start thinking about, right? There have been protests that have worked in the United Kingdom, for example, with PAL action. There have been protests that have worked elsewhere, and we need to start thinking about what does it mean to actually stop the war machine, right? But the point is, these are articles of debate. These are subjects of debate within the left. This is a criticism of the way that the left moves, and we need to be able to honestly engage with that. Banning a piece, banning me from the campus, and censoring the piece is not going to stop those conversations, right? But it is a very clear attempt to try to, suppress free speech, suppress the ability to engage in this sort of intellectual debate. And Churchill's essay is a very academic essay, but it's not removed from material reality, which is something I really appreciate about it. It bases itself very strongly in the material reality of, colonialism, of settler colonial violence, and also of policing in the United States, right? And it says, okay, we need to address these things honestly. I think such an honest reflection is necessary for the Palestine movement as well, not just the student movement, but generally. So that was sort of the basis of the piece, was calling these things out, using examples that even Churchill uses in his own essay. I used examples like the civil rights era protests, like Mahatma Gandhi's Salt March, like, for example, the self-immolation that we saw in Vietnam, self-immolation that has occurred as well in the modern context. Aaron Bushnell was a former U.S. Army veteran, or actually, I think he was active duty at the time, and
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
and he self-immolated, right, in protest against the genocide. And this is, it's not an incitement for everybody to self-immolate, right? I don't think that would be an effective strategy, but it certainly requires us to think about what is achieved by self-immolation, right? And what is achieved by these other types of protests, and what do they not achieve, right? What kind of strategy are they embodying? What kind of tactics are they embodying? These are honest conversations that we do need to have. So that was the basis of the piece, and I think it's a very important discussion for people to have. And the university shutting it down, on one hand, is infuriating. On the other hand, makes perfect sense, because of course they don't want us to be more effective.
So on the one hand, similar to yours, as you said, Churchill's work is very academic, and I think that maybe even more than the argument itself is what made him a threat to these institutions. It wasn't as though he was just writing some blog post that went viral. It's very well thought out, researched arguments, as I think is yours, which is again what I think makes it more of a target. And so clearly you're not advocating for any form of physical violence. You're not calling. It's not a call to arms. It's not. What I always appreciate about work like what you've done is that what you're simply not doing is condemning the idea of armed struggle and its role in history, even where it could be critiqued. It's just not a condemnation of it. So I've always appreciated just that approach in and of itself. But the other thing you do that I think, in some ways, I don't know, maybe this is a confession, but I felt like in some ways makes your argument more challenging than if it was some overt call to arms, because it's also, as you point out, as is Churchill's, it's a critique of the left or who claims to be doing work. So you even reference him saying something to the effect of the posturing that is involved. That to me is also what I think makes work like what you've done here such an easy target for them, because it's, again, not just that you're advocating something left of a Democratic Party style, politic, but that you're challenging those who sit even in some of these offices at these institutions, who feel like they've made some positive contribution to the world and to society, but who are sipping lattes and whatever posturing.
Right.
So I just wanted to make those two quick observations in support of what you've done here and the legacy that Churchill had laid down that you're walking in, because I think, well, both are very important. Not condemning left politics in general, armed struggle specifically, and then throwing up this critique to those of us, you included yourself, who have been part of all of these activities and end up, as you point to, reaffirming the state's legitimacy by sort of participating in. The one thing I will say I have never willfully done is do that kind of fake arrest thing you point to there. That yeah, like we're all just going to participate in this. That was one thing I was like, you know, because I've always joked like, if you ever see me getting cuffs put on me, do something because it's not a game. This
Right.
is for real.
Right. And you know,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
to these points, I wanna also bring it back to like what I think is most problematic about the, you know, the idea of pacifism as a strategy, right? Especially in the context of the Palestine movement, is that it ultimately undermines the very thing that we're supposed to be fighting for, right? The very basis of a lot of our kind of solidarity protests with Palestine is to say we see armed resistance as a legitimate form of resistance, right? This isn't to say that you agree with every single group that engages in armed resistance or the way they do it or what exactly they do or their ideologies, but it is to say that armed resistance itself is definitely something that is not just you know, something not to condemn, but is also protected under Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions. Armed resistance is explicitly protected. And I think this is super important for us to understand, because if we adopt pacifism as an end in itself, then we've undermined the ability, the inalienable right of Palestinians to resist their oppressor by armed means. And that to me is extremely important, right? We have to be able to support that, right? Again, it doesn't mean that you necessarily agree with every group that does it, but you do say that it's not on that basis that you're going to condemn them. It's not on the basis of having engaged in armed resistance that you can condemn any group, right? The other aspect that I think, you know, I wanted to touch on is also what I was kind of referring to toward the end of the piece was about this idea of fake arrest and you know, setting things up so you're arrested and going through the system. For me, this starts to skirt the line a lot and become a very dangerous sort of mentality for us, because in the end we are not the ones who, you know, students, especially students at like an elite university, right, like MIT, are not the ones who are facing down the carceral system, right? I mean, when protesters are arrested for like trespass or disorderly conduct, they're usually held for like a few hours, maybe overnight, and then they're released, and then there's some kind of pre-arraignment deal, and there's a sort of legal mechanism to make sure that they get into the system. They like dip their toe in and they're pumped right out of the system. They probably don't face many consequences, etc. But I was talking about in the piece, I spoke on a personal level about, you know, an encounter I had when I was in the holding cell, where I met this effectively this kid. I mean, he was 19 years old. And he told me about how he was, you know, he was kicked out of his house at the age of 16. He had been in and out of jail. You know, these officers knew him so well that they knew exactly where he'd be, and they would you know, kind of play a game with him where they would release him. He would be out for a few days and they'd pick him back up. You know, and you know, I saw that game on a small level happen real time. Like one of the officers came over and he said, "Oh, I'll get you a meal, right? I'll get you a meal since he hasn't eaten anything." And we waited there for like 4 hours. Nothing came, right? And to me, that was like the first sort of seed telling me, okay, this arrest that I just took, this you know, this semblance of arrest or whatever this sham is, it is just that. It's a sham, right? Because for people who really live in the communities, for people who are really connected to the communities, this is a real issue, right? And you know, what we are doing by inviting more police presence but not taking the brunt of police violence upon ourselves is just leaving the community with over policing, leaving the community with more police and less protection, right? So that was also part of the call, is to say, well, okay, we need to start really thinking what sort of resistance we engage in. Because if what we're doing is effectively to increase the police presence throughout Cambridge, and you know, we take maybe you know, a few arrests or something like this, but they don't end up getting anywhere, they don't end up with serious charges, they don't end up with, you know, with like life-threatening injuries or things like this, then you know, the people who bear the brunt of the police violence are going to be predominantly people of color, predominantly people who are in low-income communities, but in Cambridge, right? The people of the community in Cambridge. We're students. We're here for like 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and then we're out, right? We don't contribute to the community. These universities steal land, take a bunch of land from the community, a bunch of resources, and don't spit anything back in. And if we're going to act in a way that does that, right? That increases the policing and steals resources from the community, but doesn't give back to the community, doesn't help prepare the community for resistance against the sort of carceral system, etc., then we've done the same thing as a university, right? Just in the context of the left. And that was also a very strong part of my article, which I think again has been buried by this talk of terrorism and that kind of thing, right? I mean, that's that was the message of the piece that I think got buried, but I think is really, really important. The last thing that I'll just mention quickly is I think the the parallel between what MIT or how MIT has treated me as an individual and Written Revolution as a publication, and the strategies that, for example, the settler colonial Zionist entity uses to enforce their occupation and to police Palestinians. Although the scales are remarkably different, the scales are vast orders of magnitude apart, the strategies themselves are remarkably similar, right? I mean, I've been stigmatized as a student terrorist, right? I know for a fact that there's been discussion between the Committee on Discipline folks and the staff and the faculty and that kind of thing to sort of stigmatize me and other me from the community and say, well, this kid, this student is violent, is radical. He has a proclivity to violence. I've never shown that on campus. I've never, so much as hit anybody, even though I've gotten pushed, I've gotten shoved, I've gotten thrown to the ground by MIT PD. The only, violent, I would say there's only two entities that have been violent. One is these, pro-Zionism, pro-Israeli protesters, counter-protesters really, who have stepped on people, who have shouted at people, who have screamed at people in Hebrew that they should be raped and things like this, right? That has been violent. And then it's been the administration who decides when they can kick people out of their houses, when they can remove people from their communities, when they can police people, throw them to the ground, injure their wrists, right? Like slam them into walls, things like this. That's the violence that has existed on MIT's campus. There's never been violence, on any level, to be honest, from the pro-Palestine community. And that's in part because I think there's, a reluctance to go there. And I understand that point, but also because we have principles, right? And we're organizing towards something much bigger than just like attacking other students. Our dialogue is not to be had with other students who believe that Israel has the right to exist, or Israel has this or that, and this is self-defense, etc. I couldn't care less about what those students say, think, do, right? My argument is that MIT needs to cut its ties with the Israeli Ministry of Defense. MIT needs to stop doing drones research for the Israeli Ministry of Defense, which is currently being done at several laboratories at MIT. MIT needs to cut its ties with its corporate ties with Lockheed Martin. It needs to cut its corporate ties with Elbit Systems, which purely exists for for arming the Israeli entity, right? I mean, this is the violence that MIT peddles, right? MIT is able to do research and partner with these companies that support genocide, which is perhaps the most violent act possible, right? And they're able to accuse me of violence. They're able to accuse me of something like terrorism, right? Of endorsing terrorism. When this happens in Palestine, for example, just a few weeks ago, the IDF, the official IDF account, tweeted online, and they tweeted pictures of 6 journalists in the north of Gaza who have been doing excellent work to expose what's been going on in Jabalia refugee camp, right? I mean, these images that we saw coming out of there of the young man who was burned alive with his mother right outside of the hospital, right outside. They were in a medical tent. He was burned alive because of like this bomb blast, this like missile strike, and those images came from journalists, right? These images reporting about like the hundreds of men that have been just kidnapped, taken, right? Nobody knows where they are now. Nobody knows what's going on with them, right? These images came from journalists. Those journalists were then labeled as terrorists by the IDF. They said, these journalists affiliate with Hamas. These journalists are terrorists. It's a form of manufacturing consent for their assassination. That is the entire goal of doing something like that. And to me, although it's, again, the scales are vastly different, MIT, by portraying me as a student terrorist, by saying that somehow I'm inciting violence, we've got tweets comparing me to school shooters and things like this. That is an attempt to manufacture the consent for my expulsion from the university. That is their attempt to manufacture consent for my campus ban, right? Which has been levied upon me without any due process and without any reason. Because it can be very clearly seen from reading my piece that I'm not inciting violence, right? This is entirely First Amendment protected speech, right? So I just want to draw that parallel, not to say that there's any, I guess scale wise, of course, like I mentioned, it's vastly different. But I think the way that these colonial institutions operate, whether it's the settler colonial entity in Palestine, or if it's these colonial universities, they operate using these same tactics because this is the tactic that works for the colonial entities.
No, thank you for that. So Prahlad, just as we wrap up here, what can you say that is happening next, both in terms of MIT's plans and your own, and then obviously you and anyone else in association are welcome around here whenever I or we can be of any support. Please just holler back. But yeah, what does the immediate future look like as far as you can tell?
So the immediate future is I've got a hearing scheduled in front of the Committee on Discipline. And we've also, so that's going to happen, I think, next week, possibly. We did pending whether or not they're going to give me actual time to prepare, right? Because they notified me of this like just a couple days ago. But the sort of, I guess, longer term game here, and what we're pushing for is we're going to be launching a petition actually today. And pushing it out to get MIT to drop their attack on academic freedom and free speech, in particular, to get them to stop enforcing the Palestine exception. And the Palestine exception, for those who don't know, is basically this so-called exception to the rule of free speech and academic freedom, where universities adopt, or institutions generally adopt, higher standards or harsher restrictions on free speech because it's talking about Palestine. I think actually that there's a better framing for it, which is that it's a thinner veil, right? We're much closer to the truth when you talk about Palestine and you see the repression that you face. It's because they really don't want you to talk about it. So that's where they expose what they actually, in practice, what they actually believe about free speech. They don't believe in free speech, right? So I think, rather than thinking about it as the Palestine exception, I would think about it as the norm, the unwritten norm that actually exists in this country. But we're going to be launching that petition, trying to get a lot of pressure on MIT to, first of all, end the ban. Second of all, end the discipline against me for writing an article and for engaging in my free expression. This is also coupled with and I just want to point this out because I think it's really important. A professor at MIT, Michel de Graaf, he's been 28 years in the MIT linguistics department, and he's been a staunch ally, a support of the Palestinian cause. He has, for months now, faced significant repression within his academic unit, within the linguistics department. His pay was cut because he was trying to teach a class on decolonial linguistics, which is his expertise. And he wanted to include content about what's going on in Palestine. He wanted to include content from Israeli sources that show dehumanization in language, etc. And he was barred from teaching that class. And he made noise about it. He complained. He, made people aware within the linguistics department. He made the students, the faculty, etc., aware. And because of his emails that he sent out, because of making people aware of what was going on, his pay was cut. So he's usually supposed to get an increase in his pay every year or something like that, and that was withheld. In addition, the most recent action against him is he's now been removed from the linguistics department. So they've actually removed him entirely from the linguistics department, and moved him into a faculty at large in the School of Humanities, right? This is to me, it's a very Orwellian state of affairs. He's the only, as far as I know, he's the only black professor, black faculty in the linguistics department, and now he's been removed from the faculty. His expertise is explicitly decolonial linguistics. He, in particular, has been a strong advocate for Haitian Creole, right? And that's sort of the major body of his research. But he also has expertise in dehumanization and linguistics, and how that's used to enforce or reinforce colonial entities. So it's subject matter that he's very familiar with, very able to teach, and he's been subject to death threats. He's been subject to doxing on Twitter, and for all that, the university only continues to enforce it. So he's also part of this petition where we're also trying to raise awareness about what's going on with him. We're trying to reach out to a lot of academics, trying to reach out to journalists, to folks who can really sound the alarm and say, look, MIT has enforced a book ban, is now preventing a professor from teaching a class, and it has actually removed a tenured professor, again, nearly 3 decades at MIT linguistics, removed him from his own department for exercising his free speech. So that petition will go out, and we're hoping that it will build a lot of pressure so that MIT can back off.
I wish I could say I was surprised. I wish I could say, again, it's insufficient, but I'm just extending solidarity to you, to that professor, to everybody else. I know full well what it feels like when the institution engages in forms of benign neglect and doesn't even claim to be doing anything, which is another kind of surreal form that the institution can take to move you around, put you in a space, and then claim that they're actually doing you a favor. It's even more of not maybe more,
Right.
but it's another form of a mind game being
Right.
played. But all of it just, it's very triggering for me personally, that version of that last story. But similar, but generally all of it is maybe even pun intended, triggering. And thank you, Prahlad. Thank you for doing the work. Thank you for coming through. And again, anytime I or we can be of any service, please just add us to the constellation of media that you reach out to. And I'll definitely be checking back in, because this is both troubling, but I find inspiration in your work and in the approach. So I hope, to whatever extent that's a silver lining, there it is. But thank you very much for joining us. And please, everybody, check the link in the show description. And as we often say here, peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, as is clearly the case. So again, peace, Prahlad, and to all of you out there. And we'll catch you next time right here at
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.